Lord, thank you for joining us today for the Apostolic Clinic, and we bless the Lord for the privilege, the mandate, and the assignment where we can discuss matters and wisdoms and situations that affect the body of Christ. And today we want to delve on the topic of transitions. We all know that no one is immortal, and as long as we are here, we'll pioneer visions, and one time or one day, we'll come to a place whereby we need to transition, exit, or even hand over power. We see this even right now in the political terrain, and it is also very possible even in the Christian circle. And so we want to just pursue some of the very basic wisdoms that are needed even as we prepare for transition. I know many of us are trained to prepare for execution, we prepare for management, we prepare for foundations, but very few of us always come to the place of thinking that one day I will need to exit the scene and allow another person to run with the very vision that I pioneered. And with me is Bishop Mwalili. I feel like calling him the wise man because many times he comes here, he shares a lot of wisdom and a lot of insight, and I believe this is one of the conversations. So Bishop, welcome.
Thank you, Pastor T.
Yes.
How have you been?
I'm very much okay.
Thank you for calling me a wise man. I pray that I'm wise.
No, you're wise. Someone told me, I benefit a lot from the wisdoms of Bishop. And I believe to some people, this is like the book of Proverbs. Wow, this is where they get their daily wisdom.
Okay.
So Bishop, first of all, it's been a minute. It's nice to see you.
Yes, it's been.
Yes.
It's been. I missed last week.
I
traveled to some place out of town. Yes.
But you're good?
I'm very good. I'm happy. I'm strong.
Amen.
I thank God for his grace.
Amen.
Yes.
Now, today we want to talk about transitions. Of course, everything in life, before we even narrow down to ministry, everything, everywhere in life, we come through transitions. What are some of the few things that we ought to be prepared with, some of the wisdoms, even as a person is growing up, that they ought to really put into consideration, because one day they'll come to a place of transition?
Transitions begin with yourself as an individual, to just appreciate that you are not eternal. Once that is settled, then you are ready to begin to think about transitions, because the moment that doesn't register in your mind and your spirit and your whole self, you will begin to live and do things like you are not going anywhere. And I think that's where the problem is. And it's all the whole aspect of insecurity, because ordinarily, when transition means you're going somewhere. And sometimes, and especially when transition doesn't take place in a forceful way, for example, either we are taken unexpectedly by death, or something terrible happens and we have to be forced out of what we do, because there are certain things that would happen and you can't be allowed to continue. You might be a founder of a ministry, but if you begin to behave like you're destroying the ministry, there are other people who have been working with you and they are also stakeholders. So they could easily invoke certain aspects and have you, removed to save the institution, as also maybe save you. Because somebody told me one time that there comes a time when founders of institutions especially may need to be, people may need to step in to save the institution the founders founded, because if they are allowed to continue in a particular way, they will destroy the institution. And so it's a very sad situation that we get to that point. But on the converse, we have seen very excellent transitions. The one we always talk about is one for, Pastor Dennis White of the Sita Ministries, formerly the Nairobi Pentecostal Church. And, we see a man that came and established a ministry and planted, branches, and even left the main one, established another one in a very prime area, and still didn't stay, went on and retired. Wow. Of course, there may be a lot of details we don't know. Sometimes it's not good to be too dogmatic about things you don't know, but at least on the face value, that appears to have been a good one. So the first thing that I would say, Pastor T, is when we begin to think about transitions, we need to think that we are not eternal. At some point, we will exit. So once you settle with that, then now we can get back and ask ourselves, what does this transition entail?
In that time, I was watching news yesterday.
Yes.
And they were saying there's a dead end, especially to many political parties,
Yeah.
when it comes to the selection of the vice president.
Yeah.
And they say the main concern is because of the provision of the constitution,
Yeah.
whereby the vice president can take over power in case the president dies or anything happens.
Yeah.
And it is already practical. When Honorable Magufuli died,
Yeah.
we saw the vice president take power automatically.
Madam Samia Suluhu.
Yes.
Yes.
And, without any political goodwill or anything,
Yeah.
boom, she just became the president.
Yeah.
We saw what happened to the Nyeri governor.
Yeah.
When the governor died,
Yes.
the assistant took power.
Yeah.
So it's amazing that governments already have structures on transition. Maybe let's forget about I know the CITAMs, the Nairobi chapels, because of their corporate exposure, they have this kind of systems. Let's talk to ordinary fiery Kenya who got the fire, began a church, and boom, here they are. During COVID, some bishops rested. Some very senior clergy rested. I know of one particular church that up to now, there is still a lot of support from the external church trying to make sure the vision does not die. And death is one thing we don't prepare for. We know we'll die, but there are no symptoms of or even speculation of when we are going to die. So what is that? What are some of the basic steps, that one ought to work on? I saw before Reinhard Bonke died, he announced his successor, Daniel Kolenda, and they began to preach together. So the man never waited to die to say this is the man who will take over, or for there to be a board crisis meeting. He announced it when he was still alive. Someone said our African problem is the Mugabe spirit. You want to die on the throne of power.
Now, before we go there, you said something very interesting, which I want to revisit a little bit before we get to what you have asked. You mentioned about the incumbent dying in power and then the deputy taking over. You'll be surprised that it looks like we have deputies that we don't seem to be prepared for them to take over power. And that's maybe what we need to interrogate.
Wow.
Because why should there be a concern? Ordinarily, you should be able to appoint a deputy who if I go, this deputy should be able to take over. Unfortunately, listening to a number of political vibe, I realize now, because of the challenges we have had with the governors and their deputies, what is happening is, and we watch the space, it is being said that most deputies are going to appoint very weak governors. I mean, very weak deputy governors.
Governors will appoint weak deputy
very weak deputies. Because what they are saying is every time they appoint a deputy who has political ambitions, it looks like they begin to undermine them. And that's a problem of succession.
And even sabotage.
Yes, one of the challenges of raising people who succeed you is they usually begin to succeed you even before you go. So as we think about the things we are talking about, we need to understand that usually there are very few people who are gentle and subservient enough to play number two, as long as it is important for them to play number two. You find that most number twos will be number two, but they begin to cross over and begin to play number one clandestinely. And they begin to take away the loyalty from the number one that is there. So for me, that is usually the biggest threat.
So there are two strategies here.
Yes.
We are looking both, because the political is a reflection of the social.
Absolutely.
So that begins even to tell us majority of bishops and pastors, sometimes they employ or assign the post of assistant pastor to a weaker person.
Yes.
So that they still stay in control and stay in power.
And they shine.
And also we have cases of those who are given the role of assistant pastor, and they decided to outshine the one who even gave them that position.
It happens all the time. I mean, there are very few people you find like, I was looking at Moses, Moses and Joshua, because this is probably one of the best examples of succession in the Bible. The Bible says now, after the death of Moses, that's Joshua 1, it came to pass that the Lord spoke unto Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' minister, saying, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now, therefore, rise, go over this Jordan. Now, I know this is a unique situation where God himself is appointing Joshua. But you see, we need to ask ourselves, who was Joshua and where was he? And we find Joshua walking with Moses from a very early age and faithfully doing so. And we don't find Joshua anywhere either being antagonistic or speaking, opposite of what Moses is saying. And he was right there with Moses all through. And that's a great example. And so we need to address this issue, like you said, from two fronts, maybe 2 or 3 fronts. The first one is the person exiting. Number 2 is the one succeeding. And number 3 is the institution or the people that are being led. We must understand that there are dynamics there that must be managed so that if the person exiting, there are usually several issues here. If the person exiting, they don't have to always exit unto death. Because the challenge we have is that a lot of us, especially those of us who have founded ministries, we only exit in death. And there's a reason to that. Usually when you found, you spend too much time, setting up and, structuring that there was never time for you to really to build yourself in a way that you could have a secure future outside this thing that you have built. Okay. That's usually one problem.
So that thing becomes your survival
plan. It becomes your survival plan. Because clearly, if you exit, then you have no livelihood. And yet, it's very sad when you have labored all your prime life, and then when the thing you have built for 20, 30, or even 40 years, when it is just beginning to bear fruit, you are told to sit down. Other people who probably didn't even labor as much as you did come in and begin to enjoy the cream of what you did. That is something that people need to think about, so that as they criticize founders, they need to understand that there is a very legitimate concern. So that they are too busy building that they forget to build a structure that can sustain them in their old age. So that's concern number 1. Concern number 2.
So could this be the reason why sometimes some people tend to push their children? Because all around you've just built church. You have no inheritance to literally give them. So you can only give them the pastoral docket.
And it's not just, let me tell you, although this works in politics.
And I'm understanding where you're coming from, Bishop, because I can imagine all your life buying church land. And I know when beginning, 60% of the resources sometimes come from the pastor's pocket.
Sometimes. For me, that's a reality.
Most of the time. And now here you are retiring and the board. People you've discipled, pastored, baptized, joined in marriage, now become the board. And they introduce a system. Now you need to exit and you have a pastor that needs to replace you. and here you have nothing to give your children other than testimonies.
So that is a reality. And we cannot hide from that. And anyone watching, people can say what they want to say, but the reality is most people who found ministries, they go through a very difficult time because they, look, myself, I think I went into ministry when I was either 29 or 30 years of age. I had hardly worked for 4 or 3 years. So I really never did anything in the corporate world. So I just quit and began to do that, and a lot of struggling for many, many years, with little minimal pay. For the first 15 years, I think, of ministry, I don't think I earned any salary, 15 good years. So you can imagine the people who I was at university with for 15 years, they were earning, and I wasn't. So there can never be comparison. You understand that? And then my wife and children, they grow up in this environment where they have seen their father only give his life and never really bring anything substantial back home. So like you said, we are not justifying that. But I think before people judge founders and ministers too harshly, they need to also ask themselves, where has this person brought this thing from? And I'm not saying that because I'm a founder, because where we are wrong, then we are wrong, and we need to accept where we've not done things right. The ideal situation would be, as we set up ministry, we need to set up structures for succession, knowing that we will one time exit the scene. But the reality is sometimes, as much as you want, it's very difficult to make provision for that care you talked about. And we have seen some ministers who, pastored. I know a minister who pastored the church for almost 24 years. And when he left, we had to gather and raise funds to even try and buy him a home, And it was very embarrassing because we could hardly even raise $1 million shillings.
Wow.
And here we are looking at a home that will cost probably in excess of 8 million. So if you raise $1 million and he needs another 7 million, where is he going to get it? And then you begin to see he's calling young preachers and finding out, can I come and speak for you? Can you invite me? Those are the kind of things we are saying, that when you see people resisting the transition, then you begin to understand that there is a lot.
That's their life.
Yeah, this is their life. There's nothing else they know.
ever lived for.
There's nothing else they know. So for me, the beginning point would be to ask ourselves, when someone transitions, assuming even if they transition into death, they are also living dependence. What will happen to their wife and probably their children?
Bishop, you've introduced a very powerful conversation, and maybe we can revolve it.
Yes.
Someone told me, sometimes you learn from the scars of your fathers.
Yes.
There are things they will look and tell you, my son, here we acted foolishly.
Yeah.
There's a time you even told us here that before you transition to full-time ministry, make sure that the ministry needs you full-time.
Yes.
And it was a very powerful lesson, because many of us know you get the fire, go and begin.
Yeah.
Now here, someone is beginning.
Yeah.
Apostle Juma calls it the foundisiosis, a disease of founding.
Yes.
You forget yourself.
Yes, yes.
And the radical level of ministry is kujitoa kwa huduma.
Yes.
Tumejitoa.
Yes.
Mimi familia watoto.
Yeah. Total commitment.
Total commitment.
Yeah.
And there is no problem with that.
Yes.
But you're trying to say, if there is no balance in future, it might bring some problem.
Not just it might. By the way, it just hurts the family. Even when you talk to families of ministers who founded ministries, up to today, even after things look like they're good, the wives are still scarred.
And the children.
And the children.
So what will be the wisdom for someone that possibly they founded a new ministry and they are literally everything is directed towards the ministry.
Yeah.
And I know there is anyone who finds, even if it's a business, for it to work, you have to give your all. What will be that balance between ministry and especially family? Because we know sometimes the family pays the price involuntary.
Yeah.
Because now there's no consultation that I'm emptying my account and we are building this house of God.
Yeah.
So some of them just have to suffer because the man of the house has purposed this the way. What is some of the wisdom that you can give to us who are now checking in?
I think the wisdom for me would be, first of all, if you have a job or you have a business that you do, continue doing that job and that business as you set up whatever you're setting up. Find a way of balancing, because some of the things you find that a founder usually is everything. He's admin, he's HR, he's everything. Try and find other people who can work with you so that you can be able to still do some stuff that can help you keep building your own family and the things that you need to do. That's number one. Number two, you need to work with someone who has gone ahead of you to caution you from over-sacrificing. Because what tends to happen is there is no one asking you questions like, does your family have food? Is there school fees for the children? You find if there is no one asking that way, it's just you and your wife knows you're called, or your husband, if it's the other way. And they know you're called, they know the passion, they know the zeal, and they don't want to be like the one frustrating the call of God in your life. So they will keep quiet, but deep inside they are hurting because they can see they are struggling with things that they shouldn't really struggle with. The other thing would be to encourage those of you that are working with a founder to take personal interest in their lives. I'm surprised many times church leaders work with a leader, but they never sit and ask themselves, how is this man faring on? How is he paying his bills? I can tell you there's been very few times that the leaders I worked with ever sat to really interrogate my existence and what's going on in my life and how I eat and feed. So when you're working with people like that, it's important for you to really check, are they able to pay the rent? Is mama having enough money to cook for visitors? And are the kids, sleeping on proper beds and proper sheets? And, is there soap and all the stuff needed in the house? And basic stuff. Otherwise, what will happen is, like you're saying, that foundiosis thing that the Apostle David talks about, it's so strong in ministers that unless there's an external eye looking at you, You sacrifice your family, and before you know it, your wife is offended, and even after the ministry speaks, she will never recover because she looks at the church as the other woman who took away the husband and made her suffer unnecessarily.
Wow. So there has to be a balance.
Absolutely.
You don't rob your family at the expense of the
don't.
church. Neither rob the church at the expense of the family.
It is very costly.
Because we also know there are people who've gone on the extreme of now
robbing the church.
using the church to finance luxurious living.
Yes.
You know, and sometimes that's why now people say this thing looks like business.
Yeah, and again, and that's why I like the way you are saying balance, and that's where support comes from someone who's gone ahead of you and someone who can speak into your life. There are certain excesses that we must avoid, because just because you are founding a ministry and people care for you, it doesn't mean that you can live just the way you want. You will need to say, okay, as much as I can have this, let me be fair. Because again, you don't want to do well at the expense of a growing ministry. I normally liken growing churches, institutions, or businesses with a young donkey. If you are raising a young donkey to be a burden bearer in future, you don't start by loading it very heavy things. You start with light, light. As it grows muscle and develops stamina, you keep increasing and increasing. And I think that's the way we should go, so that you don't have to load your young church a lot of expenses simply because you are trying to protect your family from the vagaries of ministry. In any case, it's also the place of you as a minister being able to trust God to provide. Because again, if you talk to many of us ministers, we've seen God provide in ways we cannot explain. Supernaturally. Somebody walks up to you and just does something for you that you can't explain.
Wow. So this is an amazing conversation. We are looking at the place of transition. You've just handled one part of it.
Yes.
There are three parts of it.
Yes.
And already I love the wisdom.
Yes.
That indeed someone spoke and said, success comes with a price and sacrifices. And he said, you better choose what you're sacrificing, because there are things you sacrifice and you can never recover them. And naturally, when you sacrifice family, you can't get another family. When you sacrifice time, at least you are able to create some time later. So let's look at now a person like now where you are.
Yes.
You're already there, Bishop.
Yeah.
You founded, you can't go back. and we are not immortal.
Yeah.
What are some of the measures that you think now ought to be taken, even or on a personal level? Because I think there's something you've shared. The ministry must have consciousness to make sure that they take care of their leader even when they exit. Allow me to say some of the mainstream churches even have pension for their workers. Some of them even have a very serious retirement package, so that once you are clergy, even after you retire, they still care for you. But on this other side, it looks like once you are out of sight, you are out of mind. You are forgotten. There is always this assumption, because you're the one who tells us about God, you and God must be very close. So the God you tell us about ought to sort you even as you exit. What are some of the few things that you are doing? Because already you can see this way I'm heading. And if I don't set things in order, I might suffer, because men are men. I might suffer. And even generations to come might suffer. And I know whatever structure is being set is not just for you as a bishop for Green Pasture Tabernacle, is also for generations to come. So they will say, these are how we treat people on their transition.
Thank you very much. I think one of the, and I like what you said, that we need to learn from the scars of our fathers. I have carried a few scars myself. And one mistake I think I made was to wait for too long to put proper structures. We have structures, but you find that the structures are not really so much about the welfare of the ministers. It's the welfare of the ministry. Where, you have proper accounting structures, proper systems, procurement, all those things. But then when it comes to human resource issues, you find we've really lagged behind there. And that's one mistake that ministers shouldn't make. As early as possible, within the first 5 years of your ministry, if you can begin to put in some basic structures, and especially if you don't have a constitution, the beginning point is a constitution, because it's a constitution that outlines, these things. And then from the constitution, you develop bylaws. And these bylaws now will explain how do you handle transitions. At what point do you exit? Most ministries, for example, will treat founders in a very special way. They will say that the founder will stay on as long as they can minister, they are not sick, they are not disqualified by way of morality and stuff, or at their own will full time. If they want to exit, they can. But most ministries are sensitive enough to say, this person has really struggled all their life. Allow them to stay. And clearly, there's a point you get where even if you want, you may not be able to minister. No. So some churches allow that minister to continue being taken care of at the level they exited. So that if your pay was, say, $500,000, it continues until the day you die.
Okay.
And others have even gone further and said, if the man dies and leaves a wife, the same pay that was the man was getting will be transferred to the wife until she also exits.
Wow.
Then from there, the system is closed. Then so that now from there now, everybody else who comes will serve maybe 2 5-year terms. And some churches, to take care of this problem, would say that if you are going to be like the senior bishop of that ministry, then you will also be the senior pastor of your local church. Because the other problem is when you tell somebody, let me just give you an example. Look at our president now, President Uhuru Kenyatta. President Uhuru is still young, in my opinion. And so when you ask him to go and sit,
retire,
he has a long time. And such a person could even cause problems in a country. And I'm not saying he will.
Yeah.
Because remember, he's very influential. He has made friends. He has a lot of international contacts and connections, such that, it's like, you have a very strong, energetic person who is not busy. Because what other job can you give him? When he has been a president, you can't give him.
The highest job.
That's the highest job he can get. You understand that? Yeah. So it is important to find a way of getting these people occupied elsewhere. And there is no perfect structure that we can use. But we need to look for one that works and make sure that this person's, first of all, need for relevance in ministry is taken care of. And number two, there's a place where because they put energy and effort, they can accrue something. Okay. Because it's nothing bad like earning where you don't work.
That's true.
It's very difficult. So for me, the first thing that needs to happen is we need to come up with some sort of a structure. It doesn't matter whether we are the fire and the Holy Ghost fire type. We must understand that the ministry is an institution. And the things we are talking about are institutional. The Holy Spirit will not handle that. These are practical issues that you have to sit and use the wisdom God has given you and the planning capacity to execute some plan that will help you to take care of things. So one way would be to ensure that the resources that come into the ministry are properly harnessed and handled so that even when you have surplus, you don't start, buying private jets, just because there's money. That money could be put in other institutions. You could put in ventures. You could have a school. You could even put it in money markets and many other places so that you build this money. Because there comes a time when you realize that there isn't as much money as you think. And there's nothing bad like living from, hand and not really hand, but the offering basket to your mouth, every Sunday. That's not a good thing.
Bishop, we're picking it up from there.
Yes.
It's an amazing conversation, a real one, because I know, especially when the ministry is on the peak, we call it revival. And even mentioning about revivals, the reason why many were not sustained is because people never thought about transition. They decided to build around man, but no one was raised. Anyway, thank you for joining us right now. We are discussing matters transition, and I like what Bishop is just sharing. How do we even treat the founders? Is there a way out? I remember one pastor died in the field of mission, and the wife was living in the church compound, given the house by the church and the car. And 1 month later, she was kicked out and told, the man is dead, so the one who kept you around is dead. And maybe we'll discuss that, even not just in the time of transitioning, but in some of the things that happen, especially to pastor's wife, whose pastor went full-time. How do you handle such a situation? Anyway, see you immediately after the break.
Are you looking for quality, affordable dental services? Antodent Dental Center is your place. At Antodent Dental Center, we restore lost teeth and associated oral tissues with either permanent crowns and bridge, as well as removable, partial, and complete dentures. We restore discolored or deformed teeth with veneer crowns. We also align crooked teeth with both fixed and removable braces. At Antodent Dental Center, we do teeth cleaning and polishing to eliminate bad smell. We also do dental jewelry, root canal therapy, and oral health education. We are located at Accra Taveta Road Junction, London Beauty Building, 4th floor, room number A2. Reach us on 0707 367040 or visit our Facebook page Antodent Restoring Your Smile. Antodent Dental Center, restoring your smile with passion.
So welcome back and thank you for joining us. This is the Apostolic Clinic and we are discussing matters transition. And there's a lot of wisdom, a lot of insight, real conversation and real talk. And so before we even took the break, we're talking about how do you treat men that founded ministries, on a very practical level. People form boards and sometimes when you're out of mind, out of sight, but there's how they're supposed to be treated. But also I want to understand, Bishop, I shared this scenario before we went to the break, whereby you have a pastor who is full-time and possibly something happens and the pastor dies.
Yeah.
There was this scenario where I know this woman married to a pastor. The pastor was full-time and she was a housewife. And they were living in the church compound. The church had a house, so they were living there. This was the senior pastor. They'd been given a car by the ministry. And so the pastor passes on. No pension, no nothing. And 1 month later, the elders came and said, we are sorry, you have to return the car and the house must be returned because now the next senior pastor must check in. And the lady was very offended, very wounded because the only place of comfort and solitude was supposed to be the church. And this something, it's a person I met. I didn't know how to respond. Was part of it, I being a pastor. And so I don't know, how do we handle such scenarios? Because we end up expecting also people to serve visions and give their all. And some even give their all with all their family. In such a scenario, what would be the wisdom of navigation?
Yeah, without much details, obviously, assuming what you've told me is just what it was in the face value, I would first personally be very disappointed because assuming we are not even Christians, it's totally inhumane to do what was done. Because this lady just lost her husband and everybody knew that that's how they were living. And for you to do that, then you needed to ask yourself, okay, how do we help this lady to move on with life without disrupting her too much? I believe there's a way that could have been done. And so in such a scenario, then there needed to be a way of protecting this kind of situation whereby there's a clear outlined procedure. When a man like this exits, how do you handle a matter like this? So we need to ensure that even without structures, we are also still humane. Because Christianity is about caring about other people. And so if you just throw people out, I imagine even in ordinary, normal circumstances and institutions, they probably are not that ruthless. They will probably find what you call a soft landing. They would have maybe found a cheaper, maybe home somewhere. And if they are repossessing this car, they probably also find another alternative so that she is eased out in a respectful way. You can imagine if that man resurrected and found them treating the wife that way. He would wonder, why are these people honoring me simply because I was alive? Or honoring my wife because I was alive? And so there are some things that do not require structures. They just require the structure of our heart to ensure that we are sensitive. We say, how do we handle this person? How do we care for them? And we just, ease them into this period of mourning and make sure that they understand, okay, yeah, this house is meant for the ministers. And at some point you leave, but can we manage the change? Can we manage the transition? In my opinion, it was poorly managed and it didn't have to be that way. Yeah, it didn't have to be.
So let's come to your point number 2.
Yes.
Yeah, you said I love the concept of there must be a definite system
Yeah.
of honoring those who founded,
Yeah.
because whatever you're building on someone else's labor.
True.
I loved the idea of not even just the man,
Yeah.
but making sure also the wife and even the children
Yeah.
end up benefiting. I was looking as we were laying to rest the late Honorable Mwangi.
Yeah.
The son gave a very powerful speech, and the son said, when the father died, that's when they discovered he belonged to the state.
Yeah.
The military took over,
Yeah.
even the burial preparation. And we see the kind of retirement package that they gave, even to the founding president, and even what they're discussing right now, the retirement package of Uhuru, Honorable Uhuru and Honorable Ruto, because these are people who've been in service in a very high level.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we lose that particular kind of consciousness. And I think many generals die bitter instead of exiting very happy.
That's true.
Having built systems that are benefiting generations.
Yeah.
You heard the second point.
Yeah.
Yes.
The second point, I think, was revolving around the person that is supposed to take over.
Okay.
I think so. Because now we are handing the person exiting.
And before I come to the person taking over, do you think there is a suggested age? Governments will say at 65 you retire. And psychiatrists will tell you at 65 your mind enters redundancy.
Yeah.
So you don't have the energy to think. That's why they say the older you become, abuse becomes closer to your tongue, because thinking is too much.
Yeah.
So you just give up, and some of them, they just erupt. Possibly, just again, general wisdom. I know you've said there are people who say as long as the pastor is strong and is able to deliver and all that. Do you think there is an age possibly where you can say from this age, maybe now begin to empower the successor and make sure that systems are now running?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that, because again, we have to look at it from a practical, point of view. The Bible has not really told us anything definite about retirement. What we know is, obviously, by the time you begin to hit 65, 70 years, you really are not very strong. And at that point, you can't do much. Your activities are limited. So, of course, I would not entirely agree with people who dismiss old age as being senile. We have some of the smartest brains of old people. When you look at some of the presidents in some of the most advanced countries, they're not young. They're actually way beyond their 60s. Look at judges. There's a certain level you can't be a judge unless you have attained a certain age. And judges, I think they put their retirement age, was it 70 or
75?
75.
There.
Because the longer you practice in some of these things, the better you become. And I believe ministry is the same. The more you interact with the Bible, God's word, and his people, the better you get. And this is a matter of wisdom and the heart. So, I wouldn't be too dogmatic about age, but I would just say that people should listen to themselves. There are people who are still very strong at age 60, 65, even 70. But I think we just need to be reasonable and know that when your energy is dissipating, when you sit somewhere and you just doze off. Really, I think you also need to be fair to the people you're working with. There are too many young people that are ready really to move and to do stuff. So even if you have to keep doing things in the ministry, then you need to scale down so much that much of the stuff is it's just not you who does them. You probably are there at a level of consultation and just providing covering and fatherhood. But in terms of moving stuff, there are other people who are really doing and not just you.
Wow. So let's go to the place of preparing the successor.
Yeah, preparing the successor. I believe one of the ways that we can prepare successors is to ensure that we build a pool of possible successors around us.
Okay.
The challenge normally of appointing a successor too early is, is a very thin line between making the right thing, making the right choice, and making the wrong choice. Because people's hearts change. You can be with someone this year and they are all good, they are all loyal. But then after some time, they've lost loyalty and they are something else, and you already maybe made everybody know that this is the one.
That's one.
So unless you're really almost certain at the point that you want to, the safest way would be to have a succession plan where you are training a number of people together and exposing them to different leadership capacities. Because again, also, if you develop only one person, disaster could also strike. And that person also is not there when you think they should be there. So I think leaders need to be generous enough to build, leaders around them, so that even if you will not be there, the leaders you have left, together with the structure of succession that you have appointed, then can be able to be used to appoint the next leader without necessarily destroying the ministry. Yeah.
And we've also seen some people who, when that exposure comes, they exit.
Yes.
And some are very influential. Some are playing very key roles. I know as a father you've experienced that. When you thought now this one has caught the fire.
Then
and I've discovered many fathers put their cards close to their chest.
Yeah, that happens a lot, because again, what happens is, you expose this person to a lot of things, you give them a lot of leeway, and you expose them to some of your closest people, and before you know it, the loyalty is already being transferred. So it takes a very faithful number two or number twos to still remain loyal to the person that is, raising them up. Because again, there's a level you just can't hold. You've got to release certain things. You've got to allow them to do some things. You've got to allow them to shine where you'd have shone. And as they do that, sometimes they are probably even better than you in some way, and people will connect with them. And the day they say their time is up, chances are that they are likely to walk away with some of your most, prized team members, and it breaks your heart. But you see, as a father, you must understand. Somebody said that when you are a father, when your children are young, they stepped on your toes.
Yeah.
But when you grow older, they step on your heart.
Wow.
So you got to be prepared for that. Your heart will be trampled upon by your own sons.
So it's a language of maturity.
It's a language of maturity. You've got to come to a place and realize, God has it figured out, whichever way his work is being done. And it's difficult to manage people's hearts. So the best you can do is to create the opportunity and the structure. So what I'm vouching for here is there need to be a very clear succession structure that when this person exits, how do we get the next leader?
Okay.
What qualifications are there and who qualifies? When you have that figured out, you can raise people, and even if you rest, the team that you've set up will come and take over that, and everybody will respect that, because that is constitutionally what is launched with the Registrar of Societies. And to me, in my old age now, as I grow older, that's what I'm trying to work on and ensure that we have a very clear, structure, both at the local church and the national level.
Okay.
At my level now as a Bishop of Green Pastures, when I exit, how do they get the next bishop? Okay. And how will they treat that bishop? That should be in place.
Because I've discovered there are different ways of church management.
Yes.
There's what they call the mother-daughter.
Yes.
There's what they call the headquarters, whereby in many headquarters there's no problem.
Yeah.
Because when party A exit, the headquarter just sends another help. And I think churches that run that way have never struggled.
Yeah.
But of course, still, there's the white smoke.
Yes.
Yes. The cardinals have to gather and we wait for the white smoke to go who's the next.
And that's the same thing. I think that is just based on now the method of selecting who the next leader is. And ordinarily, that usually will be done by consensus through prayer, then probably sometimes balloting, depending on the nature of governmental structure that is used there. And, unfortunately, Christ never really gave us a blueprint of how local church government and structures should be really managed.
But at least some of them are quite obvious. People have to pray. And just they have to discern who, because when they are choosing the replacement, I think people use that example. They casted lots. But they also prayed. Yeah, they prayed. But
I think for me, the most crucial thing there was a prayer.
Yes.
Because you need to be led. And most churches do that. They pray. But you understand, brother, these things are difficult because when ministries begin to grow, a lot of other interests creep in. And especially where money and property come in. politics begin to play a very major role. And you find even in that prayer, people are conversing, and they have already talked to a couple of people. When we go there, you remember who to vote.
So you can pray religiously. You can pray with a candidate at heart.
Yeah, so unless our hearts are really helped, my brother, church structures remain institutions, earthly institutions, which are really subject to human fallenness. And we can only trust God that we will get men with clean hearts who mean well, but they don't have personal interests. And even then you still find a few creeping and things still don't go as we expect. But God's work continues.
If someone picked you as a consultant today,
Yes.
to develop a transitional manual,
Yeah.
what are some of the things that will make sure that it's captured in that constitution as a transitional manual?
Okay, the first thing would be we would have to clearly describe what this transition means. Transitioning into what and from what. That needs to be very clear. Well, you are transitioning from being what to what. Because usually the transition is, for example, there should be mentioned that this person either will die or will be removed because of certain reasons, or their term will end. Okay, then the next thing will be, where will they go? That manual should include something like, once they leave, where are they going? And number two, what is in it for them in their retirement? Those are crucial things that needs to be, managed. And then number three, how do we ensure that the institution is maintained without its breaking at the weight of these transitions that are taking place? So those are the four crucial elements, in my opinion, that if they are taken care of, we shouldn't have a problem. And of course, how do we enforce what we are agreeing on? Because it's one thing to write things, is another thing to enforce. You can agree with people, but then at some point, they just decide, well, we don't agree with this, we are moving our way. And that's when now we begin to hear splits and things like that. So if people respect the document they have prepared, and it's properly done involving the key stakeholders, and then it is lodged with a government body that helps to arbitrate if there is any problem, or another group of people who are outside your circle, that if there is a stalemate, how do you handle this stalemate? You also need to make provision such that in case there is people inside your team that are not agreeable with what is going on, there can be a redress from an external objective team that will come in and say, okay, we have listened to you, we think really this is not right and this is right, this is the way we believe it should go. And godly people, if they really care about themselves and the ministry, I think they will see sense and do the right thing.
So ideally we can't run away from structures.
No, we can't.
We can't run away from policies.
We can't.
We need to plan with the future in mind.
Yes.
And you've said something very important. For so long, people have invested in structures, infrastructure, and they've forgotten investment in the human resource.
Yes.
Whereby now we have multi-million mega churches, but the people working there are not taken care of.
They are not.
And that's a conversation possibly you can touch on. What are some of the things that advise on remuneration? Because I've seen a brother in a mega church. I sat down with him, and even just looking at his dressing, I couldn't believe. It's like you come from Runda, and I look at the way you are dressing, and I'm like, this doesn't look like a person who lives in Runda. Because I expect the size of that church
to take care of you.
The kind of the caliber of people you deal with. We expect that there is money coming in, and they just need to take good care of you. What are some of the factors that should be put into consideration, and some of the things you feel maybe as we go for as churches, these factors ought to be considered? Yes.
I think obviously the first thing that needs to happen, there needs to be very clear administrative structures whereby you really know how do you approach things in a systematic way. Who does what and whose responsibility is what. Number two, we need accounting structures. When there's proper accountancy, the resources that come in are properly secured and properly accounted for, so that, we just don't have people picking money from the offering bag and paying bills on Sunday morning.
Yeah.
That opens a very serious loophole for mismanagement, because anybody can pick anything, and you never know what envelope contains what.
That's true.
There are churches where money is expended on the floor on Sunday morning. People sit somewhere in the corner, they count, okay, where's Shikai? Where's Shikai? You have this, you pay this keyboardist, we pay the other. That's not a good way of doing things. It's very rudimentary and it's not professional. The other very important thing that I've seen is, as early as possible, a church needs to have a human resource function very well established. Because I've realized we tend to ignore the role of a human resource profession. And yet that's where now the things we are discussing revolve around. Those are the people who are trained on how to care for the resource that God has given us. So they walk into an institution, they look at it, they do an audit, and they'll be able to tell you the gaps that are in the human resource management. Those are the people that will come and tell you you are underpaying your people, because they have what they call salary service. And they look at your church and they know that your church is in this league. So for example, our church will not be put in a league of, say, the Sitams, and they will put somewhere, in the middle there, and the other churches below us. So if they look at several churches that look like ours, they will need to come and find out, how are people paid in these churches, and how is our bishop paid, and the assistant pastors and all the workers who are there. And then they come and compare, and then they try and work out and adjust. If you overpaid, then there will be a break applied, so that you catch up and other people catch up. That is important. And then that's when they also come and talk about the issues of medical care and pension and stuff like that, and how staff exit. When a staff exits, what do they get? Is there some sort of a gratuity that maybe you've worked for these years, you are saving, say, 10% of your pay, and the organization saves 10% for you. So when you walk out, you don't just walk out empty-handed. You go, and then a certificate of service, a letter that says this person was here, served us for these many years, and they were good staff. So that's the kind of thing I'm saying. And
automatically you put those structures, there will be motivation.
Yes, there will be motivation.
Ministry will not look as ministry and military look the same.
Which ought not to be, because, and that's why you find we are not attracting the very best of people to come and work in the ministry. If you try to recruit people to work in church, they are very averse. And not just that. Try and ask young girls in church how many want to marry a pastor. You'll be very surprised.
Because it's no longer...
Most of us, we are lucky, because when we married our wives, we were not pastors. We just transitioned when we were already married. So they can't run away.
They can't run away.
So structures are important, Pastor T.
Yes.
And personally, I'm encouraging pastors to really not despise the place of structuring. And even if you can't afford to hire a full-time human resource manager, we have individuals who can give you consultancy services. They come in like once a week. They sit in your office, they look at issues and they work through issues and structure things for you. And you don't have to do everything at once. You can structure these things. You can say, okay, this time we can only afford to adjust salaries to the market rate. Next time, once we do that, we are going to introduce a simple self-managed medical scheme. Next time we're going to introduce a little self-contributory pension. And then when the ministry stabilizes, we'll now have the organization contribute. Or we are going to begin to open up opportunities for staff to get some particular loan with a certain negotiated interest from a particular bank, and then you channel all the accounts in that particular bank. So there are very many things that the HR officers bring into a ministry, and when we know those kind of things, that's when you find that our churches are weak. We can't attract good managers or good leaders or even pastors who God has called, but they are also aware that they need to be taken care of.
And won't run away that we are now pastoring a very learned generation.
Yes.
And we are pastoring a very managerial kind of generation.
Absolutely.
That will place demand on the quality of services.
Absolutely.
There's something you mentioned on the passing.
And
I think it's a topic we need to delve on it on a very personal level. That is the question of church and investment.
Yes.
Slowly we are transitioning from looking at the offering basket.
Yeah.
And slowly there is the concept of how do we grow whatever we receive as what they may call seed capital.
Yeah.
And grow it into be something that can raise the church into a sustainable mode.
Yes.
Because I think the only investments we have are connected to the pastor.
Yeah.
But we have I know some of the mainstream churches have serious investment that run the church without the offering, which is a conversation we need to have.
Yeah, we need to.
Possibly next time. I don't know what's your parting shot. You've said one thing very powerful.
Yeah.
When a child is growing, they'll step on your toes, but
Yeah.
when they grow up, they'll step on your heart. I've carried that home.
Yeah, I'll say this one thing. For those of us that are working with leaders that are supposed to exit, I just encourage that we trust God to be loyal up to the very end. Today I was watching something by Steve Harvey, and he said something that is very strong, which I struggled with. He said loyalty has an expiry date.
Wow.
That, there are people you are loyal to, and at some point you have to stop your loyalty, and basically because they are not also worthy of your loyalty. Now that's a different story. I believe if God has connected you with a man of God, a woman of God that you're working with, despite the pressure, because there will be a lot of pressure. I remember once I worked with a certain senior man of God, and he traveled one time, and the people that he left me with didn't know that I could preach. So when there was no preacher, they asked me to preach. And when I preached, they all of a sudden realized I'm a very capable young man. And so they called me for a dinner somewhere in some hotel the other street. And they said, now we want to give you this church. And I just told them, no way, you can't. Because the church doesn't belong to you. Belongs to my senior pastor. And I'm loyal to him. And I had to just silence them right there and then. And so you find there will be those attempts by people to really want you to be them, because as we grow older, our ideas become fewer. We are not as charismatic and as fiery. And so we are no longer attractive. We don't even look nice. Our skin is shriveling. Our hair is white. We are not able to remember things quickly. So we are not as attractive as we used to be. So when you find yourself with someone like that, it is good to see you remain loyal to them up to the end. Because at the end of it all, I believe in God's timing. You will ascend to wherever you want to ascend. And it will be much easier because you're already working on a foundation that is laid and built by somebody.
Oh, that's amazing. That's Bishop Mwalili. And I believe this has been an awesome conversation. That indeed structures, it's mandatory. And one thing Bishop has said, some things you can't pick them from scripture. But I believe God has anointed us. One bishop said, God will anoint you, but he will never think on your behalf. So let's take the anointing, but above all still think and put systems that will last and outlive us, and make sure we have a church that is not builded around personalities, but churches that can outlive and outgrow us. May God bless you. I think next Wednesday, we are going to look at the place of church and investment. They've discovered that churches collect a lot of money. And I believe something can be done that is going to change societies. Anyway, till next Monday, God bless you.